The air in my father's library was heavy with the scent of old leather and furniture polish. It was a smell I used to love as a child. It smelled like safety, like history. Tonight, it smelled like a courtroom. I sat in a stiff-backed chair that felt 100 years old. My father, Charles, was behind his enormous mahogany desk, looking every bit the patriarch. My mother, Vivian, sat beside him, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. My brother Preston leaned against a bookshelf, his tailored suit making him look like he'd just stepped out of a magazine. My sister Cordelia was perched on the edge of a sofa, fiddling with the gold watch on her wrist. A birthday present from last year that cost more than my car. They called this a family financial meeting, but I knew what it was. It was an intervention, and I was the patient. For 10 minutes, my father had been talking about fiscal responsibility and the legacy of the Carrington name. He didn't look at me, but every word was aimed in my direction. I kept my hands folded in my lap and my eyes fixed on a point just over his shoulder. I had learned long ago that meeting their eyes was an invitation for a fight. Finally, my mother cut through my father's speech. Her voice was as clean and sharp as a shard of glass. "Let's just get to the point. Charles," she said, her gaze landing on me. It was cold. It was the look she gave the staff when they had broken a dish. "Eleanor, we love you. You know that." The lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She continued, "But we cannot continue to enable your choices. We are not your bank anymore." Preston smirked. It was a small, quick movement of his lips, but I saw it. He thought he had won. If this story is resonating with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing the video to help me grow and create better content. Cordelia stopped fiddling with her watch and looked at me with a kind of pity that was worse than anger. They all saw me as the charity case. The outlier. The one who just couldn't get her life together. The financially irresponsible daughter who worked for a nonprofit and lived in a small apartment downtown. They had no idea who I really was. They had no idea that their entire world rested in the palm of my hand. They thought they were cutting me off. They didn't realize they were the ones on the cliff's edge. And I was the only thing holding them up. And I was about to let go. Growing up, a Carrington was like living in a story that wasn't about you. My brother Preston was the hero. And my sister Cordelia was the beautiful princess. I was a background character written in to make the others look better. Our house was a museum of their achievements. The mantelpiece in the living room was crowded with Preston's trophies, soccer, debate club, junior business awards. The walls of the hallway were covered with framed photos of Cordelia ballet recital, horse shows, her crowning as prom queen. My accomplishments were quieter, and my parents treated them that way. My straight-A report cards were met with a simple, "That's nice, dear." My artwork, the one thing I was truly proud of, was never framed. It was put in a box and stored in the attic where it gathered dust. Money was the language my family spoke, and I was never fluent. Preston and Cordelia were given everything they wanted, taught that desire was the only prerequisite for ownership. For his 16th birthday, Preston was given a brand new BMW. It was parked in the driveway with a giant red bow on it. I remember the look of pure, unadulterated entitlement on his face. He didn't even seem surprised. He just expected it. For my 16th birthday, I was given a savings bond for $500 and a lecture from my father about the importance of planning for the future. While my siblings spent their summers in Europe or at expensive camps, I was expected to work. My first job was at a local bookstore. I loved the smell of the books and the quiet atmosphere. But the money I earned wasn't for fun. It went into a bank account for college. My parents made it clear that while they would cover every penny of Preston's and Cordelia's tuition at their expensive private universities, I would be responsible for my own. It will build character. Eleanor, my father said, as if character was something you could only earn through struggle. A struggle he had carefully shielded my siblings from. I went to a state school. I took out loans. I worked 2 jobs while juggling a full course load. I would call home some nights, exhausted and lonely, and listen to my mother talk about Cordelia's latest sorority party or Preston's internship at a prestigious firm. An internship my father had arranged. They would ask how I was, but they never really listened to the answer. They heard what they wanted to hear, that I was managing, that I was being responsible, that I didn't need them. Being the responsible one was a trap. It meant I was the one who was expected to fix things, to manage on my own, to never ask for help. It meant that my independence was taken for granted while my siblings' dependence was nurtured and rewarded. When Cordelia maxed out 3 credit cards in a single semester, my father paid them off without a word. When Preston wrecked his BMW, a new one appeared a week later. They were taught that there were no consequences, that there was always a safety net. I learned early on that I was the safety net, not the one who would ever be caught by it. Holidays were the hardest. I would come home to a house filled with my siblings' successes. Preston would talk about his portfolio. Cordelia would show off a new designer handbag. My work at a nonprofit helping homeless families was treated like a quaint hobby. "It's so nice that you're doing something you're passionate about," my mother would say, her tone implying that passion was a luxury for those who couldn't achieve real success. Preston once called my job a professional volunteer position. They couldn't understand why I would choose a life of service over a life of profit. To them, my choices weren't just different. They were wrong. They were a judgment on their own values, and they couldn't stand it. They labeled me the financially irresponsible one, a title that was both absurd and deeply painful. I was the only one in the family who knew how to budget, who understood the value of $1 because I had to earn every single one myself. I lived within my means. I had no debt other than my student loans. Meanwhile, my siblings bled money, living lives subsidized by our parents, lives they couldn't possibly afford on their own. But in the Carrington family, the appearance of wealth was all that mattered. The truth was an inconvenient detail. I was the one who looked poor, so I was the one who was poor. It was as simple as that. I was the shadow that made their light seem brighter. I was the cautionary tale they told themselves to feel better about their own choices. And for years, I let them believe it. I let them think I was the one who needed saving because it was easier than fighting. It was easier than admitting that I had been erased from my own family's story. I just never imagined a day would come when I would be the one holding the pen. Back in the library, the silence that followed my mother's announcement was thick and heavy. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked loudly, each second marking another moment of my humiliation. My father, Charles, cleared his throat and leaned forward, clasping his hands on the polished surface of his desk. He adopted the tone he used when he was about to impart some great wisdom, a tone that always made me feel like I was 10 years old again. "Eleanor, this isn't a punishment," he began, which was a clear sign that it was. "It's a lesson. Life is about fiscal discipline. It's about making smart choices, building capital, and securing your future. You can't live on good intentions alone." He spoke in broad, vague terms, using words like capital and assets, as if I wouldn't understand them. He was lecturing a woman who balanced the budget for an entire nonprofit organization, an organization that did more good in a single day than my father's investment firm had done in 30 years. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Preston pushed himself off the bookshelf and took a few steps into the center of the room. He looked at me, his expression a perfect blend of condescension and concern. It was a look he had perfected over the years. "Look, Elle," he said, using a childhood nickname he knew I hated. "We're all proud of you for wanting to help people. We really are. But Dad's right. Your job. It's a noble cause. But it's unsustainable. You're barely making enough to cover your rent. You can't build a life on that." "I'm happy, Preston," I said, my voice quiet but firm. It was a simple truth, but in this room, it sounded like a foreign language. Cordelia let out a small, delicate laugh. It was a sound like tiny bells, and it was meant to cut me to pieces. "Happy doesn't pay the bills. Eleanor," she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Honestly, some people just need to grow up. You're not a child anymore. You can't expect Mom and Dad to bail you out forever." Bail me out. I had never asked them for $1. The small amount of rent help they sent me each month was their idea, a gesture they used to maintain the illusion of my dependence. It was a way for them to feel magnanimous, to prove to themselves that they were good parents, even to their wayward daughter. I had tried to refuse it once, and my mother had acted as if I had slapped her. "It's what families do," she had said. "We help each other." Now that help was being reframed as a burden. My mother stood up and walked over to the window, looking out into the perfectly manicured gardens. "The decision is final," she said, her back to me. "No more support. The monthly payments for your rent will stop at the end of this month. There will be no more subsidies for your car insurance or your phone bill. It's time for you to sink or swim on your own." Sink or swim? The words echoed in my head. They were throwing me into the deep end of the pool, fully expecting me to drown just so they could say, "I told you so." They didn't see the years I had already spent treading water, the strength I had built, while they floated along on their rafts of inherited wealth. I looked at their faces one by one. My father, his expression stern and self-satisfied. My brother, his smirk barely hidden. My sister, her look of bored superiority. My mother, her back still turned to me, as if she couldn't even bear to look at her own failure. For a moment, the old feelings washed over me. The hurt, the anger, the desperate need to be seen, to be understood. A part of me wanted to scream. I wanted to list all the times I had succeeded on my own, all the sacrifices I had made. I wanted to ask them why my life was only measured in dollars and cents, why my happiness didn't count. But then something else took over. A strange sense of calm settled over me. It was the calm that comes when you finally stop hoping for something you know you will never get. They would never see me. They would never understand. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need them to. Their judgment was a cage they had built for me. But the door had always been open. I just had to decide to walk out. They thought they were taking away my safety net. They had no idea they were cutting the strings on their own parachutes. I stood up. The movement was so sudden that it made them all look at me. Cordelia's eyes widened slightly. My father frowned. "Thank you for your honesty," I said. My voice was even, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. "I understand." I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just accepted their verdict. And in their eyes, I could see their victory. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought this was the end of the story. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of mine. My other life began on my 25th birthday. It didn't arrive with a grand announcement or a dramatic reveal. It arrived in a simple manila envelope delivered by a courier. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents and a letter from my maternal grandfather, Harrison, a man I barely remembered. He had passed away when I was a child, but he had seen the future of our family with a clarity that no one else possessed. The letter was short and to the point. He wrote about his concerns for the family fortune, about his fear that his own children would squander what had taken generations to build. He wrote about Preston's arrogance, Cordelia's frivolity, and his daughter Vivian's obsession with appearances. And then he wrote about me. He said he had watched me as a child, how I was the quiet observer, the one who fixed her own toys, the one who never asked for anything. "You have a core of steel, Eleanor," he had written. "And you have a good heart. That is a rare combination." The documents established the Carrington Family Trust. It was an enormous sum of money, $23.7 million, encompassing the bulk of the family's liquid assets, investments, and properties. And my grandfather, in his infinite and strange wisdom, had made me the sole trustee. The appointment was to take effect on my 25th birthday, and it was to be kept completely confidential. My parents were to continue believing they had control, but all major financial decisions, all transfers of funds, all allowances would have to be approved by me. For the past 3 years, I had lived a double life. To my family and the world, I was Eleanor Carrington, the nonprofit worker who drove a 10-year-old Honda and struggled to make rent. I earned an open salary of $45,000 a year, a fact my family loved to bring up as proof of my financial failings. But behind the scenes, I was the one managing their wealth. Every Tuesday morning, I had a call with Jacqueline Hayes, the trust officer. Jacqueline was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 52s who had become my secret mentor. In the beginning, I was terrified. I knew nothing about stocks or bonds or real estate portfolios. But I learned. I read every book Jacqueline recommended. I studied the markets. I discovered I had a knack for it. A patient and methodical approach that was the complete opposite of my father's impulsive, high-risk strategies. Under my management, the trust hadn't just been maintained. It had grown by nearly 15%. The irony was a constant. Bitter taste in my mouth. I would sit on a conference call with Jacqueline, authorizing a $500,000 investment in a tech startup, and then an hour later listen to my mother on the phone, sighing about how she worried I wasn't saving enough for retirement. I would approve a $20,000 transfer to cover Cordelia's credit card bill, a bill filled with charges for clothes and shoes she would wear once, and then go home to my tiny apartment and eat pasta for the third night, in a row because it was all I could afford that week. Their allowances were the most telling part of my secret job. Every month, I would get the requests through a secure online portal. They came with memos that were a window into their souls. Preston's were always listed as business expenses, $15,000 for client entertainment, $10,000 for a networking trip to Aspen. I knew he was using the money to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford to impress people who didn't matter. Cordelia's requests were for household improvements or personal wellness. $12,000 for a new designer sofa. $8,000 for a spa retreat. My parents' requests were the largest. My father would request huge sums for property management or investment opportunities. But I knew he was covering losses from his own bad decisions. My mother's requests were for the country club. For charity galas, where she could show off a new dress. For the upkeep of the illusion of their perfect lives. I approved every request. For 3 years, I signed off on their extravagance, their waste, their complete and utter disconnection from reality. Part of me did it because the trust document stipulated that I was to maintain the family's standard of living unless I deemed it detrimental to the health of the trust. But another part of me did it because I was waiting. I was waiting for them to see me. I held on to a sliver of hope that if I just gave them enough rope, they would either hang themselves or learn to tie a knot. I wanted them to recognize my worth on their own. Not because I held the purse strings. That hope had been a fool's game. Sitting in that library, listening to them cut me off from a pittance they gave me out of pity, I finally understood. They would never change. They would never see past the story they had written for me. My grandfather had given me this power not just to protect the family's money, but to protect myself. He had given me a shield. It was time to finally use it as a sword. As I stood there in the library, the words, "I understand," still hanging in the air, my family's relief was palpable. They had expected a fight, tears, a dramatic scene. My quiet acceptance was an anticlimax, and it made them comfortable. They had won. They exchanged subtle, victorious glances. My father leaned back in his chair. My mother turned from the window with a faint, satisfied smile. Their problem child had finally been put in her place. They started talking again. Their voices lighter now. The tension gone. They began to discuss their upcoming ski trip to Switzerland. The renovations on the summer house in the Hamptons. They were talking about a future funded by money they thought was theirs. A future they had just declared I was not a part of. I remained standing, a silent observer to their celebration. I felt strangely distant, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. And then I felt a vibration in the pocket of my coat. My phone. Slowly, carefully, I pulled it out. The screen lit up, and the notifications from the Secure Trust portal were displayed in a neat, damning list. It was the first of the month tomorrow. The allowance requests were in. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could feel their eyes on me. My mother's smile tightened. "Eleanor, is something more important than this conversation?" she asked, her voice laced with ice. "No," I said softly, my eyes still on the screen. "I'm just finishing something up." I looked at the list. It was business as usual. Preston Clark Carrington request pending. $15,000. Memo. Q. For client entertainment and expenses. Cordelia Elizabeth Carrington request pending. $12,000. Memo. Living room. Charles Allen Carrington request pending. $18,000. Memo. Q. For property tax advance. Vivian Gable Carrington request pending. $8,000. Memo. Winter Charity Gala sponsorship. A total of $53,000. A standard month. Money they believed they were entitled to. Money they were planning to spend while I was supposed to be figuring out how to pay my rent. "We're not your bank anymore," my mother had said. "Time to sink or swim," my father had decreed. "Some people need to grow up," Cordelia had scoffed. My thumb moved. It tapped on the first request. A screen popped up with two options. Two simple words that held the weight of my entire life: approve and deny. I remembered every condescending remark, every overlooked achievement, every casual cruelty. I remembered the BMW with the red bow, the dusty box of my artwork in the attic, the lonely nights in my college dorm room. I remembered the pity in their eyes just moments ago. They wanted me to sink or swim. Fine. But I was taking the life raft with me. My thumb pressed down firmly on the screen. Deny. A confirmation box appeared. "Are you sure you want to deny this request?" I tapped again. "Yes." I moved to Cordelia's request. Deny. My father's. Deny. My mother's. Deny. Then a final option appeared at the bottom of the screen. Apply this action to all pending requests from these beneficiaries. I tapped it. A new screen appeared. Master command. Deny all pending and future automatic transfers for Charles Carrington, Vivian Carrington, Preston Carrington, Cordelia Carrington. This was it. Not just for this month, for every month. Until I decided otherwise. I took a deep breath. The air in the library suddenly felt thin. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder and louder. A countdown to a new reality. My thumb came down one last time. Confirm. A small green check mark appeared on the screen for a moment. And then the list of requests vanished. The page was now blank. It simply said, "No pending actions." It was done. In the space of 5 seconds, with 5 taps on a glass screen, I had dismantled their world. I had turned off the tap. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. My face was calm. My hands were steady. I looked up and met my father's gaze. He was still talking about a new ski lodge he wanted to invest in. He had no idea that the money he was planning to use had just evaporated into thin air. He had no idea he was a king with no kingdom, a CEO with a frozen bank account. They all sat there wrapped in the warm, comfortable blanket of their own arrogance, completely oblivious. They had just passed judgment on me. They had no idea that I was the one who held the gavel, and I had just brought it down. For a full minute after I put my phone away, nothing happened. The world continued on its old axis. My father was still pontificating about his investment strategies. Preston was nodding along with a look of smug agreement, and Cordelia was scrolling through something on her phone, probably an online boutique. My mother was the only one who seemed to notice the change in me. She watched me with a narrowed, suspicious gaze, trying to decipher the newfound stillness that had settled over me. The air was thick with their ignorance. It was a precious, fragile bubble, and it was about to burst. The sound that ended it all was not a shout or a crash, but the soft, respectful click of the library door opening. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a woman in a perfectly tailored gray suit. She was in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She held a leather portfolio under one arm. This was Jacqueline Hayes, the trust officer, my secret ally, my mentor, and tonight my executioner. A flicker of annoyance crossed my father's face. He hated being interrupted. "Jacqueline," he said, his voice tight. "This is a private family matter. Did we have an appointment I forgot about?" "My apologies for the intrusion, Charles," Jacqueline said. Her voice was calm and professional, betraying none of the drama she was about to unleash. "Something has come up that requires immediate attention." My father's expression softened. He assumed, as he always did, that the world revolved around him. "Of course," he said, gesturing to the chair I had just vacated. "Come in. What is it?" Preston and Cordelia both straightened up, suddenly interested. Jacqueline Hayes was a figure of immense importance in their lives, the gatekeeper of the funds, though they believed she answered to my father. But Jacqueline did not walk toward my father. Her eyes scanned the room, passed over my mother, my brother, and my sister, and landed directly on me. With a steady, deliberate pace, she walked across the expensive Persian rug and stopped directly in front of me. The entire family watched, their faces a mixture of confusion and irritation. Jacqueline extended the leather portfolio toward me. "Miss Carrington," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet room. "I apologize for the timing, but we need your signature on the quarterly reallocation documents. The market is shifting, and I agree with your strategy to move more assets into emerging tech." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that presses in on your eardrums. I could hear the blood pounding in my own ears. I looked from Jacqueline's calm, expectant face to the stunned faces of my family. It was like watching a photograph develop in slow motion. First, there was confusion. My father's brow furrowed. Miss Carrington? He was Mr. Carrington. Why was she talking to me? Then came the dawning. Horrified realization. The word she had used. The single explosive word that changed everything. Trustee. No. That wasn't right. She hadn't said trustee. She had said, "We need your signature. And I agree with your strategy." Words of deference. Words of partnership. Words that had never, ever been directed at me in this house. My father was the first to speak. He let out a short, choked laugh. "Jacqueline, you must be mistaken. Eleanor has nothing to do with the trust. The documents come to me. Always have." Jacqueline did not even glance at him. Her eyes remained fixed on me. "The documents require the signature of the sole trustee. Charles," she said calmly. "And they have for the past 3 years." That was when the gasps came. A sharp, audible intake of breath from my mother. A strangled sound from Cordelia. Preston's smirk had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed look of disbelief. I took the portfolio from Jacqueline's hand. I opened it to the last page, where a yellow tab pointed to a signature line. Underneath the line, my name was typed in neat black letters, Eleanor Carrington, trustee. I picked up the pen that Jacqueline offered me. Its weight felt solid and real in my hand. I looked up at my family, at the circle of pale, shocked faces. Their world had just tilted on its axis, and they were all sliding off. The expressions on their faces were a chaotic mix of shock, betrayal, and utter incomprehension. They were looking at me, truly looking at me for the first time in my life, and they had no idea who they were seeing. "Of course, Jacqueline," I said, my voice steady. "Let's get this taken care of." I signed my name. The stroke of the pen on the paper was the loudest sound in the room. It was the sound of the old world ending and a new one beginning. The power hadn't just shifted. It had collapsed on them, and a new structure had risen in its place with me at the very top. And they were still buried in the rubble, looking up at me, finally understanding that the person they thought was at the bottom was the one who owned the entire building. My father stared at the signature on the document as if it were written in a language he couldn't comprehend. He looked from the paper to my face, then to Jacqueline, his mind scrambling to find a logical explanation, to find the mistake that would put his world back in order. "This is absurd," he sputtered, his voice a low growl. "This is some kind of joke. I have managed this family's finances for 30 years. 30 years I built this. The trust answers to me." Jacqueline Hayes stood her ground, a pillar of calm in the rising storm of my father's ego. "With all due respect, Charles, you have been a beneficiary of the trust," she said, her tone factual and devoid of emotion. "You have never been its manager. The trust's bylaws, as established by Mr. Harrison, your father-in-law, are very specific." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. My grandfather's name was like a ghost. a figure of ultimate authority that even my father could not dispute. Mr. Harrison designed the trust to be passed down, but he included a specific qualification clause. Jacqueline continued, addressing the room. But looking at my father, he was concerned about fiscal mismanagement. The document stipulated that upon his designated heir, your wife Vivian, reaching the age of 60, control would be assessed. If the trusteeship committee found evidence of high-risk behavior or capital irresponsibility, control would automatically skip a generation and pass to the youngest qualified descendant. My mother sank into a chair, her face ashen. What are you talking about? Charles is a brilliant financial mind. Robert's portfolio over the last decade showed a pattern of high-risk, volatile investments that resulted in a net loss of 7%. Jacqueline stated plainly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact from a report. The committee reviewed his performance 3 years ago on Vivian's 60th birthday. As per the bylaws, they found his management to be detrimental to the long-term health of the trust. Therefore, control was transferred. My father's face was turning a dangerous shade of red. Transferred to her? She works for a charity. She doesn't know the first thing about money. On the contrary, Jacqueline said, a flicker of something pride perhaps in her eyes as she glanced at me. In the 3 years since Miss Carrington has been trustee, the trust's value has increased by over 15%. Her strategy has been conservative, intelligent, and remarkably effective. She has not only repaired the damage, but has put the trust on a trajectory for significant long-term growth. The room fell silent again. The numbers were undeniable. The facts were cold and hard. My father, the financial genius, had been losing money. Me, the irresponsible charity worker, had been making millions. The illusion they had all so carefully constructed of my father as the wise patriarch and me as the foolish child was shattering before their very eyes. Preston finally found his voice. It was raspy, uncertain. So for 3 years, every month, the money. Yes, I said, speaking for the first time since I'd signed the paper. Every allowance, every expense, every transfer has come across my desk. I approved all of them. Cordelia looked at me, her eyes wide with a new dawning horror. She was replaying every purchase, every trip, every request for money she had ever made, recasting it in this new light. She hadn't been taking money from a faceless family fund controlled by her father. She had been asking her little sister, the sister she pitied and mocked, for a handout. The humiliation was a visible wave that washed over her. My father slammed his hand down on the mahogany desk. The sound made everyone jump. Impossible. He roared, his voice cracking. I would have known. There are reports, meetings. I am the head of this family. The bylaws also stipulated that the transfer of power be confidential, Jacqueline said smoothly, unruffled by his outburst. It was designed to be a quiet transition to avoid this very conflict. I have been meeting with Miss Carrington weekly for 3 years. She is the head of this trust. That is the legal reality. Legal reality. The words hung in the air, clinical and brutal. My father's authority had never been based on legal reality. It had been based on tradition, on volume, on sheer force of will. He had been playing the king for so long. He had forgotten that his crown was borrowed. He looked at me, his eyes pleading now, searching for the daughter he thought he knew. The one who would back down. The one who would be intimidated. Eleanor, he said. His